Welcome to the Explainer. We're going to tackle a question today that trips up even some of the pros. How can a stock with a really high price tag actually turn out to be the cheaper investment? We're going to look at a powerful little tool that's designed to find exactly that hidden value in some of the fastest growing companies out there.
Yeah, it sounds like a total paradox, right? But this is the exact puzzle that the PEG ratio was built to solve. It's like a special lens that helps us look past that high sticker price and see if a company's growth potential really makes it a bargain in disguise. So here's the plan. We're going to start by looking at why the most common valuation tool, the PE ratio, can sometimes lead you astray. Then we'll bring in the PEG ratio and show you exactly how it works. We'll see it in action with a real-world example, and, this is the most important part, we'll dig into the critical flaws you absolutely need to know to use it like a pro. All right, let's jump right in. To really get why the PEG ratio is so useful, first we have to talk about the limits of its much more famous cousin, the price-to-earnings or PE ratio. So think about the PE ratio like it's just a single photograph. It's a snapshot, frozen in time, that compares today's price to today's earnings. Now, that's fine for a big, stable, predictable company. But what about a young, dynamic company that's pouring every penny it makes back into growing for the future? Well, the PE ratio just sees a high price and low current earnings, and it screams expensive without telling you the rest of the story. Okay, so how do we actually fix this problem? How do we value a company when its real story isn't in its past, but in its future? Well, it's simple. We add the one thing that's missing: growth. And this is where the PEG ratio comes in. It's this brilliant idea made famous by the legendary investor Peter Lynch, and what it does is it directly connects a stock's valuation today to how fast it's expected to grow tomorrow. It gives us a much more dynamic, forward-looking picture of value. Now, the formula itself looks super simple, almost deceptively so. You just take the PE ratio and you divide it by the company's annual earnings per share growth rate. But here's the key thing to remember. If the growth rate is, say, 25%, you divide by the whole number, 25, not 0.25. It's an elegant, simple formula, but as you're about to see, all the magic and all the danger is hiding in that growth number. Okay, so you've got this number. Now what? What is it actually telling you? The real beauty of the PEG ratio is that it takes a really complex idea, valuation, and boils it down to a pretty simple signal. Well, a PEG ratio that's less than 1. That's kind of the classic green light for investors. It suggests that the company is expected to grow its earnings faster than what the market's current price implies. In other words, you might have just found a growth stock that's on sale. Then you've got a PEG of exactly 1. Peter Lynch's rule of thumb says this is pretty much fair value. The company's PE ratio is growing in lockstep with its earnings. You've got a nice, clean balance between the price you're paying and the potential you're getting. And of course, if that PEG is over 1, that's your warning sign. It's a bit of a red flag that the stock might be overvalued, that you're paying a premium for its growth that might not be justified. It could be a sign that the hype has gotten a little ahead of reality. All right, Siri is great, but let's make this real. Let's put it into practice with a quick example, because this is where you can really see the power of the PEG ratio to completely change how you think about what cheap actually means. Okay, so look at this. We've got two companies. Let's call them Fastco and Slowco. Now, if you only look at the PE ratio, Slowco seems like a steal at just 5.6, while Fastco looks pretty expensive with a PE of 27. But now let's bring in the growth. Fastco is growing at a massive 50% a year, while Slowco is chugging along at 6.7%. The moment we calculate the PEG ratio, the whole story flips on its head. Fastco has a PEG of 0.54, while Slowco's is 0.84. And this is the big aha moment, right? The PEG ratio lets us compare apples to apples by factoring in that growth. It shows us that even though Fastco has a higher sticker price, you're actually paying less for each unit of its expected growth. In this case, it's the better value. Now, this all sounds pretty amazing, maybe even a little too easy. And this next part, this is where the pros really earn their stripes. Because you have to know when your tools can fail you. And trust me, the PEG ratio has some serious limitations. So that brings us to the most important question you have to ask yourself. Is a low PEG always a buy signal? You see a stock with a PEG of 0.6. Should you just jump in and buy it? The answer is a hard no. A low PEG isn't the finish line. It's the starting gun for your real research. You know, the thing that makes the PEG so great, how simple it is also its biggest weakness, its fatal flaw. It's just a number.
It completely ignores things like the quality of the management team, how much debt the company has, the overall risk of the business, or even what's happening in the broader economy with interest rates. And let's talk about that big G in the formula, growth. You've got to remember, that's not a fact. It's an estimate, a guess. And those guesses can be wrong, and they can change in a heartbeat. I mean, you can look up IBM's PEG ratio on the same day and get two different numbers from two different sources, just because they used a slightly different forecast. A cheap stock can look expensive overnight if that growth forecast changes. And here's another huge blind spot. The PEG ratio just completely falls apart when you look at mature, stable companies. I mean, take a solid blue chip company. It might have a PE of 15 and grow at a steady 5% a year. The PEG would be 3.0, which screams wildly overvalued. But for a low-risk company that pays a reliable dividend, that price might be perfectly fair. The PEG just wasn't built for that kind of company. Okay, so we've just pointed out some pretty serious flaws. So how on earth do we use this thing wisely as part of a real professional toolkit? Well, let's go back to the guy who made it famous, Peter Lynch. He gave us the benchmark. When the PE ratio equals the growth rate, you've got a PEG of 1.0, and that's a good sign of fair value. Now, this isn't a law of physics, but it's an incredible starting point for any analysis. So here's the workflow a pro would use. Think of it as a 4-step process. First, you screen. You use the PEG to find a list of potentially interesting growth stocks. Then you validate. You dig into that growth rate and ask, is this for real? Is it sustainable? Third, you adjust. You bring in other tools to look at things the PEG ignores, like debt. And finally, you contextualize. You look at the bigger picture, the management, the industry, the risks. And that's really the big takeaway here, isn't it? Great analysis always starts with a ratio, but it should never, ever end there. The PEG ratio is a fantastic tool for finding interesting questions, but it's your deep dive analysis that's going to find the real answers. So the next time you look at any number, any ratio, I want you to ask yourself this one simple question: what story is this number not telling me? Because if you can learn to look beyond the formula and really dig into the context, you'll move from just using metrics to truly understanding a business. And that right there is where you find real, lasting insight.